Metroid Prime, and Metroid as a whole, really, is one of the game series that I think best exemplifies what makes Nintendo special, while also being one of its most overlooked series. Metroid doesn't have the commercial staying power of Mario, Zelda, or Pokemon, but it's been here since the beginning with the NES, and the original Metroid Prime on GameCube was, in my opinion, one of that system's best first-party games. Metroid Prime 4 has been a long time coming. It released 18 years after Metroid Prime 3 on Wii, and 8 years after it was initially revealed. It does, however, prove Miyamoto's adage of, a delayed game is eventually good, a rushed game is forever bad. Nintendo ordered the project completely scrapped and reworked in 2019 after the Bandai Namco team initially booked to develop the game failed to produce a product that they thought was up to its standards. In 2019, they turned development of the game over to the tried-and-true Retro Studios, which had made the other Metroid Prime games. And 6 years later, what we got was in some ways the most fun Metroid Prime game to date. As a note, this video uses footage exclusively from the Switch 2 version of the game. To be totally upfront, I think Metroid Prime 4 Beyond is probably the best Metroid Prime game to date from an objective standpoint, but the original Metroid Prime on GameCube will always be my favorite due to my millennial nostalgia goggles. Prime 4 does come pretty neck and neck with it for me, though. Canonically, Metroid Prime 4 takes place under the, in my opinion, unfairly hated Metroid Other M and Metroid Fusion. The premise of the game is that space pirates, led by the Galactic Federation-hating former bounty hunter Sylux, attacks a Federation facility that had unearthed an ancient relic. In the fight with Samus, he accidentally damages the artifact, causing it to activate and transport him, Samus, and any Federation soldiers nearby to the uncharted planet of Vuros. Prime 4, releasing 23 years and 3 consoles, or 4 with the Switch 2, after the original Metroid Prime, obviously has a ton of quality-of-life features that the original game, even in its slightly updated Wii version in Metroid Prime Trilogy, lacked, and some additions that make it feel like an overall more modern experience. The most significant bit of modernization, which is really just an evolution of the motion controls introduced in the Wii's Metroid Prime 3, is the gyroscopic aiming. For the most part, I played the game like a traditional dual-analog FPS, but I enabled the gyroscopic motion with sensitivity set low in order to make fine adjustments to my aim, as I find I can make minor adjustments more quickly and accurately with motion controls than I can with an analog stick. That's an option for both the Switch version and the Switch 2 version. If you're playing on Switch 2, you can take advantage of the Joy-Con 2's unique capabilities and play in mouse mode, where you use the control stick on the left Joy-Con to move like normal, but you hold the right Joy-Con on its edge, so that the small IR sensor that's on the side usually covered by the system or a Joy-Con grip can read the surface it's on and act as a computer mouse, letting you aim as if it were a PC game. I absolutely love this feature and would have used it as my primary control method if I weren't so in love with the ergonomic feel of the Switch 2 Pro controller. Switch is obviously enormously more powerful than the GameCube or Wii, and the Switch 2 is a lot more powerful than the Switch, so it makes sense that Metroid Prime 4 looks infinitely better visually than the 3 previous Prime games. Most importantly, though, it runs smooth as butter. The original Metroid Prime on GameCube wavered between 30 and 60 FPS, depending on situation, and Metroid Prime 2 on GameCube targeted 60 FPS, as did Metroid Prime 3 on Wii. All 3 of those games ran at 480i. Metroid Prime 4 on Switch renders anywhere between 720 and 900p, and at 60 frames per second when it's docked, and it's pretty consistent in that 60 frames per second. On Switch 2, you have 2 performance profiles you can use. The default mode, Quality Mode, runs at 2160p or 4K, and 60 frames per second with very few drops. But the Performance Mode runs at 1080p and 120 frames per second. My vision is terrible in general, so personally, my eyes aren't good enough to tell a huge difference between 60 FPS and 120 FPS in Prime 4. I can with some games, most I can't. And unfortunately, this is one of the ones where I could tell there was a difference, but I wouldn't really notice much unless I'm looking side by side. So I used quality mode in order to take full advantage of the system's 4K capabilities. That said, if you do have eyes healthy and sharp enough to see a clear difference in frame rates above 60, absolutely go for the performance. The game definitely looked noticeably better on quality, but it was not such a stark difference that it would be worth losing out on a perceptible frame rate bump. For the most part, Samus has the same abilities that longtime Prime players have come to expect. Arm cannon blasts, missiles, environmental shots, fire, ice, and electric in Prime 4, morph ball bombs, etc. What's new for Prime 4, and adds some unique puzzle obstacles, are the psychic abilities. These include a whole host of new abilities when the Psychic Visor is active, from shooting a guidable slow-motion blast, to grabbing and throwing morph ball bombs, to manipulating physical objects. Environmental puzzles have always been a core staple of Metroid Prime, but these new psychic abilities elevate those puzzles to a new, and occasionally frustrating but always fun, level. The other big gameplay difference between Prime 4 and the previous games is that there is a much larger emphasis on combat here, especially with large battles. You'll find yourself fighting numerous enemies at once more often than in previous Prime games, and some of the bosses will spawn in regular enemies with which you have to contend while also fighting that boss. It doesn't take the focus away from puzzles and exploration the way that Resident Evil 5's shift to action kinda took away from the focus on horror, but it definitely makes combat feel much more important and like a much more rewarding aspect of the gameplay. The last big shift, despite taking up at least as much of my time as exploring any of the areas, probably made the least impact on me, and that is overworld traversal. Instead of all of the areas just sort of being connected and running between them, each of your areas, ice area, fire area, electric area, etc., are connected by a gigantic desert hub overworld. You traverse this huge desert on a space motorcycle that you mysteriously conjure from your magic space armor. I don't actually remember what the in-game explanation was for how that works, if there even was one, but it doesn't really matter. While spending hours driving across a giant desert and smashing into green crystal formations while occasionally fighting an enemy or stumbling upon a small puzzle shrine may not sound exciting, it's actually a lot more fun and satisfying than I expected. I thought I would find it monotonous and tedious when I first saw it, but I actually thoroughly enjoyed the time I spent traveling across the desert, and definitely spent more time doing so than I actually needed to. I doubt Metroid Prime 4 will be remembered as a Switch 2 system seller, nor would it even if it didn't also release on the original Switch, but I do think that it's a good enough game to be worthy of that accolade. I may prefer the original Prime for nostalgic reasons, but I'd be hard-pressed to argue that Prime 4 isn't the most fun game in the series. Between the desert motorcycle riding, to the psychic abilities, to the bigger combat emphasis, Metroid Prime 4 pretty much takes what made the first 3 Prime games great and builds on that. It may have required an 18-year wait since Metroid Prime 3, and 8 agonizing years of waiting after it was officially revealed, but as Miyamoto said, after all of the delays, the game we got is amazing. I wouldn't call it perfect. I would have liked to see more dungeon-like areas to explore, and to see more to do in the desert, but it's still a stellar game. My rating for Metroid Prime 4 Beyond on Switch and Switch 2 is an A.